Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Barry Erickson, and I'm Community Engagement Coordinator here at Wheaton Public Library. Tonight, we're delighted to bring you another art demonstration in partnership with the DuPage Art League. Founded 60 years ago, the DuPage Art League is dedicated to promoting and encouraging the visual arts through classes, workshops, gallery exhibits, and public programs such as this one. We are grateful to the DuPage Art League for arranging tonight's demonstration by Mark Sarazen. Mark has a BFA in printmaking. He came to modern-day printmaking in 1997 when he began printing on the Iris printer, the first high-resolution inkjet printer. He started his company, Sarazen Editions, in 1999. Mark continues exploring new methods to digitally capture, edit, and print. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Mark. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you, Barry. Hi, everybody. You're not going to see my face a lot tonight because I'm going to do a mix of videos and stop animation and some imagery. But the first thing I want to do is thank you for coming. There's a lot to talk about since I've been doing this since 1997. It makes me an old timer. But I hope I can impart some knowledge to you, and please come up with some questions if you have them. So let's get started. Okay, since we're in a different time zone, I'm going to give you a welcome to my studio thing. Please watch your step. There's a step up there. On the right, there's some paintings I'm currently working on. There's the printer. That's my Canon printer. There's my camera setup. Then we'll spin you around. This is my dog and pony show. This is where I review, on this table is where I review a lot of art projects with clients. Going around the room to the left, there's my drum scanner, which I've owned since 1999. And then there's the drum scanner station. And we're walking over to where I spend half my life, happily. So have a seat and let's talk about what is a giclée. So what exactly is a giclée? And how do you say it? Let's talk about a little history first. In the beginning, when an artist wanted to reproduce their work, they had to rely on mediums like serography, which is silk screening. Andy Warhol was pretty fond of this. Or lithography. I have a Bachelor of Fine Art in lithography. This was a good way to reproduce art. You can see that it was made with limestone. What you would do is you would draw on the stone, and then with an etching, acid etch, you would make the stone hydrophilic or hydrophobic in certain spots, meaning that where there was black, where you can see the black there, that would receive ink. That then you would lay a piece of paper over it, a damp piece of paper, and run it through a press. This was a very involved process, and it was very difficult to make different color separations on it. So if you had a painting or a watercolor that you wanted to reproduce, this was definitely not the way to go. You could make a poster. This is called halftone printing. It's made with dots, and it's printed with 4 color inks: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Think magazines, newspapers, catalogs, and coffee table books. The larger the screen number, 150, 175, the better the reproduction. But the disadvantage of that is that you have to use a commercial press, at least at that time, which is very expensive. And the papers available were very limited. You were limited to glossy and semi-glossy papers. Along comes the Iris 3047. Iris stands for Intense Resolution Imaging System. It was the first 4-color dye-based continuous tone inkjet printer. It was originally made for the fabric industry, and how it works is that you see on that illustration there, that photo, there you attach a piece of paper or piece of fabric, in this case, to the drum. You close the door, and then the four colors, that's what it was, four colors, traverses the whole width of the drum. It takes about an hour for a 35 by 47 piece of paper to do that. The interesting thing is that the iris also prints in dots, just like the aforementioned halftone screens, but the dots are assembled in such a way that they're virtually invisible to the eye. Also, you could print on watercolor paper, and a variety of what they call, or what my friend Joe used to say, substrates. And it had a large color gamut. So that was a clear advantage. I learned about this machine because my employer at the time, Crosstech Communications, purchased one to print packaging comps for McDonald's, for Leo Burnett, for other large agencies. It was a quicker way to see a design from a designer on paper. However, one day, this photographer, I think his name was Paul Meredith, he walked in and he asked us if we could make a Giclée. And we said, "What's that?" Well, we didn't know, but he said, "Let me leave you my file," which is a black and white file. And we scanned it and we printed it. And we were extremely happy with the results on this Somerset velvet paper he brought in, but he was not. We failed miserably. He took his job and left in a huff. But it did send me and the company on the path to learning what is a Giclée. Now, as I said, it takes about an hour to print on these. And if you open the top of the machine, the drum would stop, and there wasn't a guarantee that it would pick up where it left off. So there was an incredible amount of waste. Once we put the watercolor paper on the drum and I printed some black patches, I was amazed at how the density and the velvetness of the black was. So I was definitely hooked. Graham Nash was one of the first people to try his hand at printing on an iris, and he purchased one from Steve Bolter, who worked at Cytex, and he started his own company called Nash Editions. So you could call Graham Nash, who, if I think you all know, Graham Nash of Crosby, Stills, Nash. He's kind of the father of digital printmaking. I think they're still in existence. These machines did not come at a cheap cost. They were, I think the 3047 was about $126,000. So you don't just purchase those without some kind of dedication to the task. The first iris printers had some problems, though, major problems. They were dye-based inks, and they were only made to last for a few months. So soon you had many artists coming to Nash and other pre-press places around the country asking to have these reproductions made, but in 6 months they were fading. So enter Lysin. Lysin longevity inks were produced, and they were still dye-based inks, but they guaranteed, I think, 60 years without fading. It was here that Jack Dugain at the International Association of Fine Art Digital Printmakers came up with the word Giclée. And the word Giclée was invented or coined to separate the pre-press people from the fine art digital printmakers. The word Giclée comes from the French giclure, which means to spray. If you mention that to a French person, they'll laugh or grimace, whatever. But it's a funny word. Unfortunately, there were a lot of big egos in the IAFADP, and everyone was using what they called proprietary technology. So the group disbanded after 2 years, but not before a few standards were put in place. And that's the pronunciation Giclée. Okay, so G-I-C, and don't forget that accent. Here you have the evolution of the dot. There on the right is a Giclée print magnified. So you can see that the dot is randomly put on the page, but with the naked eye, you cannot tell that it is almost a continuous tone print. Today's printers can lay down well over 2,500 dots per inch. And I think the Iris printed about 1,800 at the time. In order to facilitate, or for me and my company to move forward with actually thinking about using the Iris to make Giclées, you have to understand that in the early days, there was no real communication between a computer and a printer like this or a scanner. And so the Apple and Adobe and the International Color Consortium came up with ICC profiles, or color management. This is kind of the bedrock of how files are handled between each device, because without it, each device is basically speaking a separate language. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to communicate between the scanner or the camera and the computer monitor and the printer. The thing is to try to get predictability. Back then, predictability was extremely difficult. In fact, the first scanner I ever worked with did not have a visual clue about what you were doing. It was all numeric and bar graphs and stuff. But back to the profiles, this was a way for you to actually get what you saw on the computer monitor. It wasn't foolproof, but it would work. Some people in the pre-press department called it color manglement, because they were used to working in cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and color management wanted you to work in red, green, and blue. There was one operator that I worked with, his name was Larry, and he insisted that a red tomato was 100% magenta and 100% yellow, and it wasn't. So we started using ICC profiles, and that kind of fixed that problem, sort of. When you talk about color profiles, you're talking about what you can see and what can actually be printed. In this illustration, you can see the visible range of colors is enormous, but then you go down to Adobe RGB, which is a little bit smaller, and then sRGB, which most cameras shoot with, and then look at that print color space. That is very small indeed. So whereas you can see millions of colors on your monitor, you can probably only really print like 28,000 colors. So it's important to understand that when a client brings in a piece of artwork, you are able to communicate with them that, some colors you might not be able to print as easily or as clearly as what you're seeing in your picture. So, and you can do all that now with Photoshop. Speaking of Photoshop, I've been working in Photoshop, which is an image editing program, since version 2.5. I believe it's up to version 24 now, but It's the major editing tool, and it's you used to purchase it. As you can see, there's a, I don't know, and if any of you recognize it, but in upper left there's a floppy disk. Those have gone the way of the dinosaur, and now Photoshop is a full on subscription service where you pay a monthly fee. Taken together, the iris, the Mac, and the drum scanner that I'm going to show you about convinced me that this was something that I could do on my own eventually. And so I started my own company. There I am, young and sitting in my basement in Evanston, Illinois, through a program called City 2000. I was able to purchase the Heidelberg drum scanner, which at the time, and probably still is, was one of the best drum scanners ever made. I also purchased 2 irises. I had the small one, the 3024, and the 3047, and they ran pretty continuously. They were beasts, though. They needed to be cleaned all the time. Blasphemy. That's pretty much when I first started doing this. There was a lot of resistance to the Giclée process, probably because of the fading issue. Also, the price. Photographers in particular were very attached to their dark rooms. And also the quality of the scans that they were getting, they weren't very happy with. The galleries didn't really want to sell Giclées. But over the years, I've seen that resistance melt away. And now Giclées are pretty much standard. They're also, if you're a photographer, they don't call them Giclées, they call them archival inkjet prints or archival pigment prints. A Giclée is, in essence, a reproduction from an original. Today, photographers, if they're shooting digitally, they're not using film. So the archival inkjet print is actually the matrix, the actual print that they're getting from the camera made on an inkjet printer. This is the Epson Stylus Pro printer, which was touted as the iris killer. It was 6 colors, and this was Epson's original foray into the wide format inkjet printer world. They were pretty nice printers, but they did not compare to the iris. Along came the Epson Pro 9800. This was also their second iteration. Canon hadn't joined the fray yet, so it was still Epson and iris. But a lot of my clients started purchasing the smaller Epson printers, desktop printers, and clearly they were giving iris a run for their money. This is my current printer, the Canon IPF 4100. This is my 4th Canon printer. I owned the Epson 9600, the Epson 9500, and then I've owned the Canon 8100 and the Canon 8300, and now the 4100. The reason why I switched from Epson to Canon is because the Epson printers were notorious for clogged nozzles. I could never get them to, it seemed like every day there was an issue with the nozzles. From the day I brought in a Canon printer, I never had that problem. I also preferred the interface with the printer over the Epson. The 4100 is a 12-color pigment printer, And you'll notice that we don't use dyes anymore. We use pigments. And that makes for a more archival print. The color gamut is pretty large, almost to as much as Adobe RGB. They're not fast printers, but they can print on a variety of papers, canvas, watercolor paper, photo papers, and they're all rated at an archival rate of over 100 years, according to Henry Wilhelm. Here's the iris once again. It was retired at the Smithsonian. So now you know how to say Giclée. Now you know. Here we could stop for questions. If anybody has any questions.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Just a couple of things. Someone noticed right at the beginning when you were talking about the history, you showed a Mao print of one of Warhol's. Is that the one that's in the Art Institute?
That I do not know. I picked that up off of the internet.
Okay, all right, thank you. Someone's just looking for a little art history lesson there. Someone else is asking, what is the difference between your products and the prints available in the 1970s and 80s?
Interesting question. I don't think there were any, well, there were no Giclées back in the 70s and 80s. And I think we would have to know what the actual product was that was being produced back then. Was it a poster produced on a large commercial printer, or was it a lithograph? Don't
Okay,
know.
all
Sorry, I
right.
can't answer that
Well,
question.
yeah, so if you have a follow-up question, please go ahead and enter that in the Q&A. Mark, do I understand that then Giclée is kind of a general term for high quality prints, or is that
Yeah,
not correct?
that is correct. But as I said, that there is a differentiation between a giclée, which is a reproduction. Say like you brought a watercolor in and I photographed it, made a digital file, and then printed that on watercolor paper. That's a giclée. However, photographers do not like that term giclée because they don't consider their file printing on an inkjet printer as a reproduction. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah.
Right, right.
So
Okay.
it's a made up word, really. It is. It's a made up word, and it's more for marketing too. You could say inkjet print, but then a lot of people say, well, why am I spending so much money on an inkjet print? That kind of thing. So it's some marketing in there too.
Okay, all right. Well, I think people have had a chance to enter their questions in the Q&A. Just a reminder to those attending to go ahead and open up your Q&A to enter those questions. But I think at this point we can go ahead on to the next section.
Okay. And hopefully I get this right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. I decided to it's like I thought like, well, what would be informative for people to like how do I go about making a giclée? So I put together this list. It's a lot to read, so I'll go through it for you. The first thing you want to do is you want to digitally capture or scan your artwork. You want to convert it into pixels. Pixels are the building blocks for any digital print. Then the second step is to adjust the digital file to match the original artwork. And for critical judgment, what you want to do is you would want to print from Photoshop to your printer with known settings, meaning that you would want your monitor in a good calibration state. You want to know that your printer is printing correctly by running tests to make sure that the nozzles are up to snuff, and so then you can run proofs, which is the third step. I would run a small proof. I'm going to go over this shortly. If the client approves the proof, You proceed to step 5, which is the making the final digital file and then printing it. And then the last step would be to actually record it, or I mean, I don't even know if people are using CDs or DVDs anymore, but most of the files I keep, I still use those. So let's start with image capture. As I mentioned, I use two things. I use a Heidelberg drum scanner, which I've had for years, but still does very well. And I use a Sony camera. But I have to point out that a lot of people are using their phones now. There's 1.2 billion Apple iPhones on the planet right now. So a lot of my clients are bringing in files shot on their phones to print. Initially, these weren't very good files because of there wasn't enough resolution, but now there seems to be enough resolution. Then the other problem is that there's things like when you hold a camera the wrong way, there's anamorphic distortion, the lighting is not correct. So if you're unless you're very tech savvy, then I would highly recommend getting your original either scanned, which means that it has to fit on the drum scanner, which would be 18 by 18, which is impossible for a 20 by 24 painting. 15 years ago, that problem was solved by you, the artist, bringing your original to a film lab and then having it converted into film. The caveat with that is that now you're going from two generations. So you have your original, you have your film, and now you have a scan. And that's the way I used to work. Everything was done with film. I worked with an artist in Winnetka, Kurt Frankenstein, and he had 8 by 10 film shot. They were beautiful, but there was always issues with color balance and lighting and stuff like that. So right now, the drum scanner that I use, I mostly use with photographers for film. For this demonstration, however, this artwork by my client Nadine Gordon-Taylor just happened to fit on the drum perfectly because this is the format she works in. So I mount it, and this is the image you'll be seeing throughout the demonstration. This is her Taurus, and it's mounted on the drum behind a piece of Mylar. It's affixed to the drum, wrapped behind a piece of Mylar, which is taped securely in place. The drum scanner was really the first method to capture artwork digitally. But soon, after flatbed scanners started getting an ascendancy, and so did a scanner called an Imicon, which was called a virtual drum scanner. But still, the Heidelberg scans can scan up to 11,000 pixels. And it's very, very precise. But still, it's, it was $50,000 machine, and they don't make them anymore. So don't think about buying one and putting one in your family studio. Okay, so here's a little, here's me scanning the ox in fast motion and twiddling my thumbs at the same time. Okay, there goes the scanner, it goes up, goes down. I come back, I make some corrections, tell it what to do, I go away, and that's that. Then I transfer the scanner over, or the scan over to my other computer, and I work on it in Photoshop. But these days, I've been using a digital camera, this Sony A7R III, because, and with this very nice lens, it shoots fantastic images, and I can shoot up to 30 by 40. Now, this is also one of those situations where I couldn't really photograph my own artwork for years because I had to outsource it, because I didn't want to spend $25,000 for a phase one camera back or a Dicomed camera back. So I outsourced all of my large paintings to a guy down the street. Invariably, they did a good job, but most of the time they just weren't aware of what they were doing. And then I heard that Sony was really breaking through in the photographic world over Canon and Nikon. And I saw some test files online, and I decided to send someone who I knew had some. I wanted to see like what quality of like what like a 24 by 30 on canvas or watercolor paper was. So I liked it. I liked what I saw. So I purchased this camera, and then I set about still sending my artwork, outsourcing my artwork to the person down the street, and then photographing it myself. Well, after like 5 tries, I decided that what I was doing was really comparable, if not better, than what they were producing down there. The Sony can produce a raw file, which is a file that's in 4 pieces of up to 150 megabytes, which is a very large file. This would also should be uppermost in your mind. If you're going to shoot artwork, you want one of these little things called a color checker made by X-Rite. In those squares, all can get lined up with software program. So once you put this in with the actual subject, you then take it into like a program like what is the name of that program? On1, and then it will adjust all the color balance and the grace balance and your darks and lights for you. It's wonderful. And here's a little sequence of me capturing Taurus again with the camera. So now I'm going to show you what we do with that file. So I'm going to break to Photoshop. We're going to do a little color correction and a little cloning, and see if I can do this right. Share, and I'm going, there I am, and I'm going to Photoshop. And here we are. Okay, so like I've said, this is the program I've been working in since forever, 2.5. It's changed quite a bit, but if you're familiar with Photoshop or unfamiliar, the tool palettes are here on the left, and then there's all different various things over here. So, but I just want to show you what would be the first thing we would do. Okay, this is my raw scan, and we're going to zoom into it at about 200%. Now, since this is a demo, I didn't really go out of my way to clean the Mylar or anything. So you can see there's a lot of dust in here, which is totally unacceptable. But there is software that you could purchase to use as a plugin for Photoshop, which will alleviate a lot of this stuff. Or once you learn different masking techniques, and I'm going to just make a mark. This is called a marquee right here. And I'm going to, I need to move this control panel out of the way. I'm going to show you what happens if I use like dust and scratches. You can see that it went away. It goes away. But inadvertently, it also took some of the artwork away. So you have to be very careful with that. But typically, a person who is working in Photoshop, they would start off using the rubber stamp tool. to delete or get rid of stuff. So you can see I can go like this and you start doing this. This is quite tedious. You can send your work to China if you like. And I've checked that out, and a lot of companies do that, or another country, which I prefer doing it myself. But this, like I said, is extraordinarily dirty. Now, I know that this artist, she uses a compass for her circles, so I'll just delete that. Okay, so say we're all cleaned up. Okay, so I'm looking at the file. I probably have the original in my light viewing box, which is to my right. And the first thing I want to do is I'm going to add what they call an adjustment layer. And an adjustment layer is a layer that's on top of the original artwork. And it allows you to do things like this one is called levels. And by moving the levels this way, you can see that the image is getting darker. This is your white point. That this, you do the that's where you set where your whites are, stuff like that. So that would be what I would do on this. The next thing I would probably do is I would probably do a color balance. Now, a color balance, I can see that from the original artwork that the ox is not as pink. So I could go into here and I could do this, move my reds to more cyan, maybe add a little green like that. And so there, and then you can turn the adjustment layer on and off, on and off, on and off. Now, right now we're doing everything globally, which means these adjustment layers are affecting everything on this background layer. Now, if you didn't want to do that, that's when you start learning masking. So let's just make a small mask. Okay, so there's a mask. And say like you could just affect your reds or your yellows, or you could even pick out your sample. You could go in and with your cursor or your eyedropper tool, you could go in and say, oh, well, I want to pick up those. And you can see them in this window that I'm only affecting that. Okay, so it's probably the poppies and some of the apples. And then looking at my original, I decided, oh, this could use some more saturation. So if you look at the poppies, I'm going to swing it all the way, and the apples, I'm going to swing it all the way to the right. You can see that I'm just affecting that area. There are many different ways to make a mask in Photoshop. There's many different ways to control your color. So if I show you one thing, there's probably another person probably does it a completely different way. So now we've seen hue, saturation, levels, and color. You could also use curves. And that's basically the same thing. All your darks are over here and your lights are over here. And then you could like say, well, I just want to affect this area right here. So I'm going to, no, that's wrong. I just want to affect that right there. So you can see I can drag my thing right there, my little dot right there, and then I can just affect like what I would call the midtones. Okay, so the other thing about Photoshop, and there's many things you could do, is that this is where I see that a lot of people run into problems, is naming their files. Typically, a file that comes off of a camera or even a scanner has a IMG 305.2. And most people will not go through the hassle of naming their files and therefore they can't find them. So right now, we're going to name this file, okay? So I do a command save as, and here I add the client's last name first, and then I'll say it's ox or Taurus, and then I'll put what dimension it is, say it's 16 by 20, and then what paper it's on, aquarelle, okay? So it's important that if you're going to digitally do stuff, you get into a really good flow of naming things. Now, what do you want to save your file as? Typically, most people are saving things with JPEG. JPEG is a lossy format, meaning that every time you open and close the file, you're losing data. I would recommend TIFF. TIFF is like the granddaddy of all file formats. It means tag image file format. Very large files over 4 gigabytes you can save as a Photoshop file, but for now, I would save as a TIFF. And you can see that I'm saving the layers, which creates a much larger file. And I'm embedding the Adobe 1998 RGB profile so that the printer knows, hey, this color is this red, and hey, this color is this green. So, okay, so I do that. Now, if you're using Photoshop, I would recommend also using Bridge, because Bridge is a good way to keep track of your files. All right. So what else am I going to show you here with Photoshop? The naming conventions. Also, you should also save often. So my little thing I've heard was SOS, save often silly, so you don't lose your files. In the old days, Photoshop used to crash all the time. And so did the Mac, but these days it very rarely happens, but still it's very good policy to save your files. There are many, many other controls I could show you, but I'm just showing you the bare minimum just to, I mean, you know, there's unsharp mask, there's all kinds of filters, but I would just try to keep it simple if you're going to be doing this. And then when you're done, you can either collapse your layers like that, and then save it again, or save it as a different file. You could call your layered file a working file. So that's Photoshop. Any questions on that?
Yeah, there were a couple questions that came into the Q&A there. One was about your slides, particularly after that slide came up that had all of those steps in your process. Would you be willing to share at least that slide with us?
Absolutely.
I could send that out. Thank you.
Absolutely. Sure. Yep.
And then another person is asking, how long does an inkjet print from home typically last? Perhaps as like a contrast, and does it depend on the type or quality of the paper?
It depends on the printer. You want to make sure it's a pigment-based printer. You want to make sure that you use papers that are probably made by Hahnemühle or Canson. Those are the two big manufacturers. There's others like Red River. There's a lot of knockoff papers. I would be very careful of those because they are probably manufactured by the large companies, but then they're probably spoiled in some way, and that's how they sell them. So I would be careful with that. I know people who are always trying to like cut corners, and I've tried that, but I don't do it anymore because I've been burned so many times because of that. So I wouldn't recommend trying that. You can also try printing on papers that you can pick up in the store. Um, or I've printed last year, I printed on animal hides. I printed the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution from a company in Montgomery, New York. They're a fifth generation tanner. And they came to me and they said, can you print on animal hides? And it's like, it was very, very challenging. And I'm not going to do it anymore because I have a new printer and I'm worried. So I wouldn't do that.
Wow. All right. Another question is, they say, is your service just for professional artists seeking to sell reproductions, or can casual amateurs also use your services for printing, like for home decor?
Good question. I work with everybody. I work with all my artists one-on-one. Everybody comes. I work out of my house, so I schedule appointments. People come. There's no such thing as a bad question or bad artwork or I've done a lot of different kinds of things. Some artists are really, they market to galleries and they're on Etsy and they're making a lot of money. And then some people, a lot of retirees come to me. They're just like, they loved making artwork when they were young, and now that they've retired, they have time. And so they come and they say, well, how do we do this? And so I see that very often, very often.
Okay, great. And kind of a follow-up question there. Can you give us any kind of a sense of the cost?
The cost. Okay. So all the costs are on my website. Well, I'll just break it down for you though. There's what they call the setup cost, which is the actual digital capture. And that varies that varies because of the size also. So I I should know my prices by heart, but I'm afraid I do not. The second part is the print, and that's all billed out in square inches. So like a 16 by 20 print, for example, I think is $50. And then I offer percentage discounts for that as well. So
Okay, that's helpful just to kind of give us a ballpark. That's great. Thank you. And again, I invite people to go ahead and enter questions in the Q&A, especially if you have follow-up questions, to make sure that we get all those answered. I was just wondering one other thing. As you were making those adjustments in Photoshop, uh, when you're like adding more red to the apples, let's say,
yes.
is that due to your comparison of the reproduction with the original, or is that based on maybe the artist's input, or how would you make those decisions?
Um, Typically what I do is I get the artwork, I photograph it or I scan it, and then I try to match it as closely as possible. Now, sometimes an artist will say, well, I didn't do such a good job with that red in my watercolor. Could you like juice it up a little bit? And that, yes, I can do that as well. Or do you see how my pencil marks are still on that watercolor? Could you remove those? Um, I remove signatures. Um, so, it's like the goal is to make the artist happy so that they come back again, of course. So, but yeah, it's like it's good to see. I've had artists actually cry when they see their prints for the first time,
Wow.
unbelievably. So it's a pleasurable experience working with the artist that I know.
Right, absolutely. Well, and someone else is mentioning it here, how, they've worked with you before and you're very knowledgeable and a real expert at this. Someone is asking about your website, and I will be putting that in that follow-up email, so everyone will have that information. And if you're watching the recording of this program, just email me at b.erickson at wheatonlibrary.org in order to get
Okay.
that link. So we will definitely get that out. There's just one more question here. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you use the color checker?
The color checker I put it in the actual camera shot. I photograph it with my lighting all turned on and my settings on my camera all made. And then I remove the color checker out of the shot and shoot just the artwork with it. I then bring it into there's a two-step process because the files that come off the Sony camera are broken into 4 pieces, and it's called pixel shifting. And I bring that into a program called Pixel Shift DNG. And then they go to a program I call Capture 112. So I don't call it that, they call it that. And there I can use my eyedroppers to determine what my white looks like, what my color temperature is when I photograph those, because color temperature is very important when you're photographing art. I didn't mention that, but I should mention it now. You want to know, like, if and color is measured in Kelvin. So the Capture One will tell me, like, okay, this was shot with 4,800 Kelvin light, and that way it knows what a gray looks like, what a gray should look like. On the color checker, if you put your eyedropper over one of the grays, it should measure 128, 128, and 128, which is halfway between 0 and 255, which is all your levels of color in RGB. So by doing that, you also correct the color balance. So when I finally get ready to export out of Capture One, I'm usually pretty safe with, like, bringing it into Photoshop. And the only reason I could do it all in Capture One, but I am so familiar with Photoshop that I just don't want to leave it right now. So
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
sure.
And just to note, somebody had been asking about your website. I did drop that into the chat as well. And again, we'll send that out in the follow-up email. Someone is asking, does colored pencil reproduce well?
Excellent. Very well. Yes,
Okay,
absolutely. Yep.
perfect.
Every nuance of the pencil we can capture. It's very good. Very, very good.
Okay, I think that probably hits all the questions for now, so we'll let you go on to the next section.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's see. I got to wake up my iPad again. Okay, so we went over file preparation and we did some questions. All right, now it's time to print. Well, obviously, I'm not going to be able to take the file and print it. So because I'd have to go across the room, and I don't have a camera that I could do that with. I didn't set up for that. So we're going to pretend that I'm making a print. So, but wait, you want to know, like, what papers are you going to print on if you're going to do that? So we could print on William Turner paper, which is made by Hahnemühle. And I'm not selling Hahnemühle products, but these were all available online and I don't think they're very good images, but they're the best I could come up with. So that's William Turner paper, which is the watercolor paper. It has a nice texture to it. One client says it feels like sandpaper though. And I have had a few issues with it over the 20 years I've been using it, where some of the ink rubs off. So I'm kind of getting away from that, and I'm starting to use the aquarelle paper, which is a little bit better. Another paper that you could print on is the Photorag Baryta paper, which is fantastic for photography. It's got a nice pebbly finish. The blacks are just like jet black. They're very rich, and the detail is incredible. Or a new paper in the last couple of years is also photo rag, but it's metallic. And I would say it's more pearlescent. And this, you can't print every subject matter on it, but there's, today I just printed some Phragmites with a deep blue background. And the print is stunning. It's just beautiful. I think she's going to like it. And then there's the old standard photo rag. That was the first paper that most photographers, once they accepted Giclée or archival inkjet as in their future, they gravitated to that paper, and that was very, very big. So those are 4 papers available. There are many, many papers available. I also print on canvas, and I also do the gallery wraps, which are canvas prints stretched on stretcher frames, which I helped a man down the road develop. So you have to be careful of paper. Now you have to, I don't want to say that, but all papers, all inkjet papers are sized, meaning that they're coated with they have a coating, which makes them receptive to ink on the surface. Some papers, they want to be whiter than they really are, so the manufacturer adds optical whiteners, which right now, I think that in the old days, 10 years ago, I think that was a real no-no, but I think it's becoming more acceptable, and I don't know why exactly. I'm not up on that, but I would stay away from papers with optical brighteners because it affects their archivalness. Typically, you can expect a print made on the current generation of printers at Canon or Epson and on all these papers to last 100 years without fading. We're back to our ox, and I made some proofs. These are strip proofs. Before you print your masterpiece, or I print your masterpiece, I want to take these sections. I want to print a section, and then look at it in a 1-to-1 ratio with the original. So what I would do is I would trim these down right to the image, and then lay it on top of the artwork. I stand back, I look at it from different angles, and when I'm happy with it, then I call the client back, and the client comes and they say yay or nay. Typically, I'll make about 3 proofs before I really think I nail it. Sometimes I don't nail it. I had a couple of years ago, I had cataracts in my right eye, and I was seeing everything too yellow. And I really didn't know that till I closed one eye one day and then the other, and I saw, oh my God, all my proofs are yellow. So you have to be careful of that too. That's a sign of aging. Once the client is satisfied with the proofs, then we can agree on how large it's going to be, how many they want, and when they can come back to see it. So here is a print coming out of the machine, much, much faster than it really happens. So you could actually make a print much faster if you set the resolution lower, but I don't want to do that. So there's our ox print coming out of the printer. Now you have to decide, after you have your prints, whether you're going to edition it or not. I want to move this. This fancy little graphic here shows you the printed area and the paper. Typically, you want to number your edition on the left side, the title of the piece in the middle, and then your signature. This is all usually done with pencil, and usually we leave a wide enough margin that you can do that. Some people prefer to sign on the back. That's called inverso. You can do that too. Then you have to decide, and you don't have to decide anytime. You could tell me 2 weeks later, but you say, well, I want to do an edition of 15. Now, the beauty of digital printmaking is that you don't have to print all 15 at the same time. You could print 2, but you would have to keep track of your numbering system if you're going to addition. So where it says number and addition, the first one would be 1 out of 15, and then the second one would be 2 after 50, 2 out of 15, etc. Now, I've run into situations where someone has made an addition of 15 and she sold out all of the 15. So now what does she do? Well, the workaround is you could either sign them as artist proofs. I'm talking about number 16 is an artist proof, or that I don't know. That's a little unethical. Or you could change the size. Typically, a lot of people will print their artwork in 3 different sizes. So there's a small, medium, and large. So that's another way of getting around it. Or you could you could do an astronomical addition number, 1 out of 500, which I would not recommend. So, so the additioning, though, really is a holdover from the old days with lithography and intaglio. And really today, the first print off the inkjet printer should look exactly like number 250. Formerly, like on a print made on a lithostone, the first print was the best print, and then over time the stone would degrade, or the image would degrade on the stone, and those prints were less and less looking like the original good to pull print called a bon à tirer. So so that's something to consider. You can addition or not. Then you have to also consider, now that you've made your lovely print, you have to take care of it. So I include handling instructions with all my prints. I wear cotton gloves when I take them off the press, or the printer rather. Most of the papers come on a roll, so I have to reverse roll the paper for a few minutes so that it lays flat. Never let your print come in contact with corrugated cardboard because it'll yellow the paper. Try not to expose it to the harmful UV rays from the sun. I have a print on the wall that I did 20 some years ago, and I haven't seen any significant fading whatsoever, and that was a dye-based print, but with the longevity ink. Store your print in a dry and dark place, protected by glassine, or interleaves, or with a clear bags folder. Learn how to handle your paper so that you don't do crimps and dimples in it, because paper, like everything else, has gotten very expensive, and you don't want to waste your final piece of paper. So now I'm going to show you the stop share, and here is the print. So there it is, all this loveliness in a clear bag. So we've made a print. I've talked about the history of Giclée. You know how to photograph it or scan it now. So what kind of questions do you have?
Okay. Mark, someone's asking, does the printing in your home create noxious fumes from the inks or the papers, or is that no longer an issue?
No, not an issue at all. I do use solvents on the drum scanner, though, that are noxious, and I don't like it, but I don't really have a choice. I have some ventilation in here, but no, the printer's very clean. It's like the inks last a long time too, I have to say, because these cartridges in this printer are 330 milliliters, and I fired up this new printer at the end of June, and I haven't changed any of the inks yet.
Well, sounds great. Someone had dropped into the chat something about the David Hockney exhibit at the Art Institute. Did you have a chance to see that perhaps? I know that you're in New York, but
No, I haven't. No, I have not. I haven't been to Chicago in a few years now.
okay. All right. And just to clarify, I mean, you were talking about the numbering on the prints or the editions of it. So is it correct that that doesn't refer to the quality of the reproduction anymore? It really is just to signify maybe a limited number of copies being out there in the world?
That's correct. In my opinion, they don't refer to the quality of the image anymore. No, no,
Okay.
not at all.
Yeah. All right. Well, I was trying to give people just another minute or two to put in questions. It looks like we don't have any more at this time, so we'll let you move on.
Okay. Um, Back to Keynote. I just want to, I'm done with my presentation and I wanted to thank you all for being here. Um, let's see, there's my website. I want to go back. I want to thank the DuPage Art League and the Wheaton Public Library, Barry and Sandy for facilitating this event. And I want to give a special shout out to my dear friend Sue Thomas, who asked me to do this like 2 years ago. So thank you for that. And then there's my website. And I think Barry's going to do that to show everybody. So, oh, now my mouse isn't working. Okay.
Yeah, so I went ahead and put the link, the website in the chat, but also I'll be sending out a follow-up email and
Okay.
I will make sure that it is there as well. So we'll just give
Okay.
people another minute or two to enter any
Yeah. Yeah.
questions.
I know that you said 2 hours and I'm willing to stay and answer any and all questions for another 20, another, whatever it's going to take.
Well, thank you. That's very generous. I, again, will allow people another few seconds here to formulate all those burning questions.
Sure. And if anybody wants me to go back to part of the discussion or something, if for I can do that also.
Great, great, thank you. Um, if you would maybe send that one slide to me that had the steps in the process, since someone was particularly interested in that.
Okay.
Um,
Is that something I do through email, Barry?
Sure,
Or,
you can, yes, yes, you can just send that to me via email and then I can just attach it. uh,
okay. I'll
Since
send
it's
you
just
I'll send you a PDF then of that.
perfect.
Okay,
Yep,
good.
yep, and then I can just attach it and so people have that information. And
Okay.
again, if you're watching the recording of this program and would like that particular information as well as the links to the other things that we've mentioned, you can email me at ce@wheatonlibrary.org. That's CE for community engagement at wheatonlibrary.org. And
Okay.
I'd be happy to send those things out to you. Um, Oh, here someone is asking, obviously we're halfway across the country from you. Uh, if you were doing business for us, how would you handle the proof process when someone is distant?
Well, we would have to do either FedEx or UPS back and forth. I used to do that when I first moved here from Illinois. Uh, a lot of my clients, they did come for, or they did send me back and forth for a little while until they found someone that they were happy with back in Illinois. But yes, I just worked with someone from California, so I still work with a lot of people all across the state, all across the country. Um, I do have a Calendly uh, app or a Zoom feature in my on my site where people can make appointments to talk to me, and we do a Zoom kind of like this.
Yeah, sounds great. Okay, well, at this point, I think there's just lots of appreciation and thank yous in the chat and in the Q&A. This was so informative, Mark. Thank you very much.
You're
And
welcome.
we will get this up on the library's website soon. So, and again, thank you to the DuPage Art League for setting this up.
Absolutely.
Take care, everybody. Have a great evening, and we hope to see you again soon.